about going down the rabbit hole of avant-garde music is that eventually what was once exciting and challenging eventually becomes your easy listening. What starts with discovering that you like the off-kilter style of Thelonious Monk's comping? Over time can lead you to Art Ensemble of Chicago or Cecil Taylor. Same for outsider music. One day your coworker turns you on to the music of Wesley Willis. Rock and roll McDonald's. Rock and roll McDonald's. And before you know it, you're an outspoken, unironic evangelist for the Shags. It's Halloween, it's Halloween, it's time for skips, it's time for squeeze. So that's me. I'm always on the lookout for music that gets labeled with the tags of weird, atonal, noisy, or disturbing. There can be some really good stuff in there. I have a memory, for example, of looking through an online list a few years ago. A list titled Most Unsettling Albums Ever Made, or something like that. And it included a ton of things I was already familiar with. Eskimo by The Residents. Trout Mask Replica. Naked City. The Fugs. And included among all of the familiar albums was just a handful of ones I'd never heard of before, including Yeti by Amon Düül II. I filed it away as one I needed to come back to and revisit some point. That and Trip Through Hell by CA Quintet. A short time later, Rolling Stone published their list of the 50 greatest prog albums of all time. And Yeti by Amon Düül II was on that list as well. In the intervening years, I have had the chance to listen to CA Quintet's Trip Through Hell. It's kind of a sparse psychedelic affair with those creepy high voices over the top. I don't yet have enough information to triangulate on what I might expect from Yeti. If it's the same kind of moody psychedelia I heard from CA Quintet, then I'll probably have a good time. Okay, surface level. I am hearing a largely improvised psychedelic freakout along the lines of the Electric Prunes, the Ultimate Spinach, or the Pretty Things. But with some of the higher, freakier, ethereal type voices over the top of the main lyrics, and an occasional violin. Even though a lot of what's happening on Yeti is clearly improvisational, there are chord and melody choices that show more musical intelligence than a lot of the one-chord psychedelic jams of the late 60s. There is also an underpinning of urgency and focus that a lot of psychedelia lacks. A sense of danger, maybe even anger. This isn't just a trip for trip's sake.
This was a counterculture sort of music, and not unlike some of the music that came out of America in the late 60s as well, but for entirely different motivations. So part of that was creating their own type of music that had nothing to do with their German past. And it was one that was pretty devoid of American blues influences. Instead, it was more of a blend of psychedelic rock, avant-garde composition. It was largely about exploring hypnotic rhythms and extended improv.
I am reminded of nothing so much as the Plastic People of the Universe. And if you're not familiar with the band The Plastic People of the Universe, let me give you the very, very short version. The country we know today as Czechia was once Czechoslovakia, and things were not so great there after World War II. In 1968, a group of students in Prague put together a band as an act of protest, and named themselves after a Zappa tune. Over the next years, they would release several albums and be arrested several times. The end of the story involves the Velvet Revolution, Václav Havel, and Tipper Gore, and it's well worth looking into. But that for another time. Back to Yeti. Beyond everything I've mentioned so far, the psychedelic improv foundation, the interesting musical choices, the urgency, I'm also hearing structural nuance, diversions in time and in form that make me think that these tunes are more than just intelligent jamming. The opening of the album is a 4-part suite. consisting of Burning Sister, Hallucination Guillotine, Gulp a Sonata, and Flesh-Colored Anti-Aircraft Alarm. The entire suite is bookended by one of the oddest and hookiest sets of chords I've ever heard in a psychedelic context. For the songs, what I'm hearing is the album seems to be divided into composed tunes on the first half and improvised tunes in the second half, but even the composed tunes feel very loose. On the other hand, the improvised tunes never get overly self-indulgent, focusing more on the collective sound than on individual spotlights. Plus, I really like the bongo and 12-string vibe in the tune Cerberus. It's not a sound you hear very often. But for me, these tunes aren't giving me very much the first time around. There's a lot more I need to explore, and a ton more reading to do. So, more Yeti, please. This album is a perfect example of why I do so much research when I dig into an album. I think many of us, especially those of you watching this, have heard the term krautrock before. Seems antiquated now, doesn't it? But it's a term that's used to encompass the wave of music coming out of West Germany in the 60s and 70s from bands like Kraftwerk, Can, and Tangerine Dream.
Speaking of krautrock is actually a British phenomenon in the sense that it was the Brits' reactions to this music that tagged it as krautrock. In German, it actually means other things. It can refer to herbs, weed, or drugs. In case you don't know, krautrock is also called cosmic music, and I think that's a good way to put it, because while it's included in the progressive rock genre, it's something entirely different. Although it does share one thing with all types of progressive rock, and that is a very forward-looking attitude and approach to push past established norms and go into uncharted territory musically. But in some ways, this music was a reaction to the typical symphonic progressive rock out of England. The Germans were determined to do something different, and they definitely did. Some of the prominent groups of the scene at the time were New, Can, Faust, Tangerine Dream, Kraftwerk, Cluster, Ashra Temple, Popol Vuh. Did I say that right?
Popol Vuh.
Harmonia. And of course, today's subject, Amandul 2.
But there's an implication to this phenomenon that didn't occur to me until I started doing research on Amandul 2's Yeti. First, let's do some quick math. If you were in your 20s in the late 1960s, that means you were born sometime between 1935 and 1949. And can you think of anything that might have been going on in Germany during those years? So with that in mind, stop to ponder for a minute. Can you think about what implications that history might have had for your upbringing? For your growing up as a kid? Can you imagine what that might make you think about your teachers, the police, your parents? Under those circumstances, can it be any surprise that while America was having its struggle with civil rights in the 1960s, the young adults in West Germany were undergoing a severe identity crisis, forming art collectives and communes, trying their very best to distance themselves from both their inherited national background and from undue Western influences? Well, that's what Amandul was originally, a music and art commune. That's why there are two bands with the same name. They both came from the same commune.
This movement was partly born out of protests. There were many radical student protests in 1968. The German youth rebelled against the country's legacy in World War II. They didn't want anything to do with it, for obvious reasons.
Incidentally, also heavily influenced by Frank Zappa, thanks to performances by the Mothers in West Germany at the time.
Some of the main influences on these early krautrock groups included Terry Riley, the Velvet Underground, the Beatles, and early Pink Floyd. American minimalists were also an influence, including Riley, Tony Conrad, and a gent named Lamont Davis.
So, put all of this together, and it's absolutely no wonder that Amandul 2 bears some similarities, at least in tone and urgency, to Plastic People of the Universe, right? And unfortunately, this similarity extends beyond just the music. It also extends to being the target for police as well, because there was another commune in West Germany at the time called the RAF, led by two guys named Baader and Meinhof. If you don't know the story of the RAF and Baader-Meinhof, I implore you to look it up. I won't go into it here, but let it suffice to say that the authorities were indeed gunning for anyone associated with the countercultural communes in West Germany at that time. Oh, and there's also the time that Andreas Baader broke into Amandul's space. He crashed on singer Renate Knaup's bed and stole their clothes. And this is why all of this is important, because this history affects how I hear the music on Yeti. What was at first just slightly above average 60s psychedelia is now in context for me. It's 67 minutes of egos cut completely loose and looking for a new path to self-identity. What I'm hearing here is not just focus, it's not just danger, it is the collective sublimated anger from imposed cultural amnesia. It's being told by the entire world that you have to be on a short leash because of your warlike tendencies, only to look inward and see no such inclination. It's where you stand when there are no giant's shoulders to stand on. I respect this album a lot. I also happen to like the music. I don't know that I'm all impressed with their skills as individual improvisers, but as a group, they're mesmerizing.